Hi, it's Robin. So this past week I watched both Obsession and Backrooms, and everyone has been talking about it. It's been all over my For You page on Instagram, and I wanted to do a video comparing them. I definitely think that they both deserve to be viewed based on their own merit and not, compared to another piece of art, because they are different. And so if you haven't seen them, I definitely would recommend watching them before watching this video. However, I do think it's fascinating that they're both made by horror YouTubers. They're both horror films, and they both came out in May, and so I was able to see them back to back. And so naturally I did compare them in my head, and so it just seemed more interesting to kill two reviews with one stone and just make a video about both of them. So I'm going to start with Obsession. If you're just interested in the Backrooms part, then you can skip ahead. But I'll go ahead and talk about Obsession. Essentially, Obsession is about a loser dweeb named Bear who is infatuated or into his coworker slash longtime friend Nikki. And the main conflict is that he likes Nikki and he wants to confess to her, but he kind of just keeps fumbling. And so at the end of the night, where he makes his last fumble, he makes a wish on this thing that he got from a, what's it called, like witch store. Not witch store, but like a magic store or crystal store, I don't know. And he makes a wish on it, and he makes a stupid wish. He says, "I wish that Nikki loved me more than anyone else on earth," or something like that. And that is where the movie begins, all the tension, all the themes, everything. Well, not really, but that's where the main conflict arises, is because Nikki becomes a little bit of a crash out. So I wanted to start with the cinematography first, because that's obviously the first thing you kind of notice when you're watching a movie. And this one is different because the aspect ratio is different. It's 4:3 instead of the standard, I guess, widescreen. And so that immediately caught my attention. And at first I kind of just thought it was kind of like how people use grain nowadays to just add a creative touch, but I think it actually really added to the horror, because you can see less of the screen, and so it's kind of up to your imagination what's outside of the frame. And a lot of the shots were definitely very static, which again I thought was maybe just a budget thing, but then you kind of see later in the movie that it adds to the horror. A lot of times throughout the movies, they will have a static shot and they'll slowly push in during the emotional parts. And that's really interesting because they jump scare you using that. But instead of like, oh, it's so quiet and, someone pops out of the closet, it's more like they pan over to something that's creepy, or you see something blurry out of focus in the background that's creepy. And so that's really cool, because it kind of does, I guess, what Bong Joon-ho does, which is put a lot in the frame, in just one static frame, but they use that to their advantage. And I assume it also probably simplified the shot planning and the actual production side of it. So I thought that was really creative. And I just think it added to the suspense as well. For example, there's one scene where he's kind of confronting her, and they push in during this emotional moment, and you're kind of feeling the tension. You're like, okay, what's gonna happen? And then they pull out and you're like, okay, the conversation's done. But then they pan over to a door that's covered in duct tape, and so that's like the jump scare. It's not like a traditional jump scare, but it's still like a what the fuck moment, and that's pretty cool. Similarly to the cinematography, the sound mixing is Similarly to the cinematography, the sound mixing is also perfect for creating suspense without being like a traditional horror movie. That's something I've noticed first too, is just how crisp everything sounded, and how not even just surround sound, but there's just a level of, it felt like the dialogue was a layer above the other audio, but not in a bad way. It was definitely noticeable, but not bad. But I think it adds to it, because there's times where she's in the dark and you like can hear her, but you can't really see her. There's times when they add suspense by, like, instead of just doing the backwards reverse effect on her movement, they might slightly have like an overlap or a lag within her own dialogue, which is really cool. Which I think also adds to one of the themes that I think the film has. And the sound mixing also tied into the cinematography because, like I said, you can't, there's some times where you don't see what's off camera, but you can hear what's off camera. And that's much grosser sometimes when you hear the squishing noises and you have to use your imagination because it's just, there's no room in the frame to see it. And then they eventually pan down and it's kind of gross. So yeah, sound mixing was great. I like that they used all of the technical aspects to their advantage in terms of making the suspense and horror side of it instead of just I don't know, doing something for the sake of doing it. They actually, there was a purpose to everything. And so the stylistic choices had a purpose. They weren't just there to be stylistic choices. And I think I appreciate that a lot. So now we can get into the meat and potatoes, which is the story and the themes, which I think is the most compelling part of the film itself. And going in blind, I wasn't expecting a horror movie, especially a be careful what you wish for type of horror movie, to be as captivating and as, for lack of a better word, deep as it was. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate when movies have messages. I mean, don't we all? But yeah, I definitely appreciate when horror movies try to use the horror genre to actually push something instead of just being a typical horror movie. And so I think that's what kind of makes it stand apart. So essentially, one of the biggest things when you watch this film, you'll notice that they talk a lot about consent. And I think that's important. I think using this be careful what you wish for trope is a really interesting way of exploring consent. And they're a bit heavy-handed with it, but I think for good reason, because I mean, just on social media, I've already seen people being like, oh, like, Nikki's my dream girl and stuff. And I'm like, you definitely missed the point of the film. Nikki is not her dream girl. Yeah, Nikki's character plays heavily into the Manic Pixie dream girl trope at the beginning of the film, when we're first introduced to the character. So Bear is the typical, like, Scott Pilgrim, lame guy, can't really stand up for himself, can't really do anything, lacks courage. And then Nikki is this woman who gives money to the homeless. She buys shots for everyone. She's like this idolized version in his head. And so she is his Manic Pixie dream girl that is supposed to bring him out of his shell. And she does that, but in probably the worst way possible. And it's interesting because it's his fault. So that's where that conversation of consent comes in, because is it really love if you wished for it? And that's brought up a lot. Different characters in the film are concerned for her mental health and whether or not Bear is taking advantage of her. It comes up very often. So yeah, they needed to be heavy-handed because at the beginning, I guess there are some people out there that can make the argument that even though he wished for it, I mean, like, she's still making the choice in some weird mental gymnastics way. But as the movie progresses, you definitely see the themes of that's not even what he's wrestling with. He's not wrestling with consent. He's wrestling with the inconvenience that she brings him. And he makes it seem like he cares about consent, but he doesn't care until it becomes inconvenient. I really like that they showed that in the beginning montage, because even as an audience member, I think you're like, okay, maybe this isn't going where I think it's going. They seem pretty happy together. I know it's a horror movie, but things are pretty chill. And so in that happy montage, you're like, okay, maybe it's not too bad. And, you know, you see that in Bear's side, that he doesn't care about her lack of consent until it becomes inconvenient at that restaurant scene, which was a magnificent scene. Nikki's actress, I mean, that was golden. I think it had such, I didn't want to say subtleties because it wasn't a subtle performance, but going into it, you don't realize how much she's going to crash out until she does. And just the fact that she says like no 5 times, but each no has a different emotion behind it, I think is very beautiful. Her acting was very great. Anyways, and that is the point in the story where it pivots to us seeing Bear's choices. So it's not about consent, right? Because he was participating in this relationship even when, you know, he kind of had an idea that she didn't consent. Once it becomes inconvenient and his friends are telling him that she's lying about her dad having cancer, then he finally actually confronts the situation. So it's, yeah, again, not about consent, it's about inconvenience. And I think that's really fascinating when it comes to the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope, because a lot of these people, especially in movies and in real life, it's like you want the free-spirited girl, but only to be free in a certain sense. You don't want her to have the freedom to say no to you. And that is a big thing, because essentially I think they kind of imply throughout the entire movie that she doesn't like him, but he likes her free-spirited nature because it opposes his character. He doesn't have that courage, doesn't have that ability to be free, not even to the last second, honestly. So yeah, throughout the whole film, things just keep getting worse and worse, and you think you kind of flip-flop emotions with Bear. I mean, he's low-key annoying the entire movie, but you flip-flop emotions with Bear because you think at some point he's going to eventually realize, like, hey, you are damaging Nikki. But then there's a scene where real Nikki comes out while fake Nikki is sleeping, and she begs Bear to kill her. And Bear says, right, choice, the character has a choice. And Bear says, is it really that bad being with me? And that's when you realize, that's when they really pound down your throat that this is about consent, because again, he has seen the damage that he has caused her. She's literally begging to die, and instead of being concerned with her well-being and her mental state, he is focused on her need for him. And that brings me into my second theme of this movie, which is codependency and mental health, and kind of being an enabler, because I think throughout the entire film, Bear is definitely an enabler. He's making excuses multiple times for his partner's behavior to his friends. No matter what the situation is, he is kind of finding an excuse, even when he knows it's a lie. Even when she's told him it's a lie, he finds an excuse. He knows things are wrong, but he enables that behavior because guess what? He wants Nikki to need him. So Nikki's entire arc felt like a mental health episode, especially kind of going from that dreamy like state of everything is wonderful, everything is great, to slowly crashing out more and more. I think again, Nikki's actress did a great job of showing, what's the word? Nikki's actress did a great job of showing how it feels like to be codependent while mentally ill. And unfortunately, I can relate to this. There's a lot of scenes where you can see how much she is begging to be loved in her voice, and how she's like, I will change, or how after she crashes out, she's like, oh, I'm sorry, like, why do I do that? And that's very common, relationships with either some type of toxicity, some type of abuse, some type of substance abuse, where you're like, I don't know where I was in a different head state, I'm so sorry, and then you go back to being in that bad head state. So definitely a lot of themes of mental health, maybe even substance abuse. They have oxycodone a lot within the film. Yeah, so I definitely see the theme of being an enabler. I think they really show that Bear is powerless. He's a coward, even up until the end, and in order to get that power, he needs to take it from someone else, and he's taking it from Nikki, and that's making him feel needed. That's making him feel like he's in control, and he doesn't really care about anything else besides that need to finally have control, unless it's inconveniencing him. That comes up a lot because he doesn't say like, oh, I wish I could take this away from you, I wish I could heal you. He doesn't say anything like in concern for her. He just asks, why can't you be normal? Meaning, why are you doing this to me? Why are you inconveniencing me? Why can't you be normal Nikki? Which is kind of I don't know the right term for it, not a double-edged sword, but kind of like normal Nikki, the Nikki you want, would have rejected you. So you don't want normal Nikki, you want this idolized version of Nikki. So yeah, I definitely really relate to that aspect of Nikki, even just in terms of like OCD. So I do have OCD, and it feels like that, where everything feels very real and very serious and very like you're caught in a loop, and then you don't realize that you were in a loop until you're out of it. And so that ending, I think, not just the ending, but throughout the whole movie, it was very relatable as someone who struggles with mental health issues, of like just wrestling with your brain and then trying to stay in a relationship. I think it's also interesting how much they kind of hone in on the fact that Bear just wants her to be normal, because it's kind of like he wants his cake and to eat it too, and you see that even until the end. When he, you know, everything has gone to shit, he still wants his cake and to eat it too, where he has two options. Either he has Nikki, and that free-spirited Nikki is the one who also has the freedom to reject him, but then he has Nikki that loves him, but that Nikki is also the crazy Nikki, and she crashes out a lot, and there's only two options, and he wants to combine both of them, and that's just not how it happens. They are mutually exclusive. It shows how selfish of a character he is, that even until the end he doesn't. Speaking of the end, let's just get into it. So at the end, after many failed attempts of making Nikki normal, of trying to get the wish undone, trying to get someone else to wish, he finally accepts that he has to commit suicide in order to reverse everything. Guess what? First method, you know, una pistola, he chickens out. And so Chekhov's oxycodone comes in, and he is going to overdose himself like he overdosed his cat. Not overdose his cat, but like his cat overdosed on. Another way they showed he was powerless, couldn't even save his own cat. Anyways, but despite multiple people dying, Nikki being a serial killer, screaming in pain, screaming to be killed, he chickens out and throws up. And of course, like in real life, like that's a very understandable fear of death and fear of annihilation or whatever. But in terms of a protagonist, that choice to throw up was like the final seal. I mean, there was many final seals, but that was the final seal of like, he does not care. He is so focused on his own well-being that he can't even take a little nappy nap for a long time in order to like save Nikki and any other person that she might hurt. Incredibly selfish. There's a fake cop-out ending where you hear the One Wish Willow break and he falls in love with Nikki, everything's happy, and that ending would have made sense. But I think what really shows why this movie is different from other movies and why their creative decisions and like stylistic choices, etc., really showed the, not perfection, but just like how much they really cared about the craft, is that he does still end up dying from the oxycodone. And I think without that end, their whole story of consent and enabling someone and everything would have been, you know, wiped away. But the fact that as an audience member, you have to sit with Nikki as she's realizing everything that she's done, that wasn't even her own choice, but still is her, you know, wasn't her responsibility, but wasn't her fault, but it's still her responsibility. That is probably the most disturbing and most horrific aspect of the entire film, because you sat there in the back seat and she was also in the back seat, and you both have to sit with that emotion, because you hear her crying throughout the credits. And I think that was just like a cherry on top. I liked it. So some side things, I liked the comedy. I think they were very good with adding comedic moments without taking away from the emotional parts. So yeah, they kind of integrated the punchlines into the actual suspense, which I think was a really interesting way of merging the two. There's a scene where he gets one crush, and again, it just shows how much they really play into the horror tropes. So the first scene is when he's going back to the crystal store. He tries to buy the One Wish Willow and it's gone, but then it's actually there. That was really funny. So like such a classic horror thing, like, oh, my one way out is gone. And then, you know, you're like, okay, maybe he can do it, maybe he can like reverse everything. He goes to his friend and his friend is like, I wish for $1 million, and like a billion dollars just like come raining from the sky, and it's really funny. And it's just such an interesting, like, to add the suspense break with the punchline. Very creative. I liked it. But it didn't take away from the emotional moments, like a lot of Nikki's monologues, which are really good. I love the monologue at the party where it's like Hansel and Gretel, but it's talking about like peeling his skin and like, you know. And then there's another one where she's talking about death, and that one, wow, I cannot get over the actress. She was fantastic. Anyways, so yeah, they knew when to add in comedy and when to release the suspense, but kind of release it with the comedic aspect, you know. I know I didn't bring up Sam. I mean, that was also just such a sad aspect. There's not much to say. I mean, like, if you watch the movie, you just know it's sad. I mean, it just adds to he wanted this idolized version of Nikki that he had in his head instead of Sam. I mean, that's his choice, right? It's not like, oh, you like, I'm not like other girls, but still, like, he had a real version of Sam right there that liked him, but he wanted Nikki still. Other thing is that this is not my original thought. I actually got this from someone else, but Nikki's uncanniness did seem a lot like AI, and I don't think that that's a theme at all, but I do think they might have gotten a bit of some inspo from AI, just in terms of how Nikki would flip, I guess. So when she realized that she said something wrong, she'd backtrack. And she did it a lot, and you see that a lot with AI when you're like, actually that's not true. You're like, the AI is like, you're right, exclamation point. How did I forget that? And then you're like, actually I was lying about that too. And the AI like backtracks again. Nikki did that a lot, and that's kind of similar to AI, also very similar to just mental health issues in general. But I think the AI aspect added to the uncanniness. That's the biggest thing. We still don't know by the end what has taken over Nikki's body. I don't think it matters, because I think it only matters that it's not Nikki. And I think it also matters that it's not human, and that's probably why they had some AI aspects to it. And they even bring up like Genie AI or something on the screen, which I thought was funny. I think that's everything that I have on Obsession, so we can move on to Backrooms. This part is probably a little bit shorter, just because there wasn't, I think that was the biggest issue with the movie, is that it did feel a little empty, and for good reason. I think the Backrooms liminal space, there is this emptiness, this uncanny emptiness that happens. So it made sense. In terms of story, it was underdeveloped in certain areas, which caused holes, not where I don't think they wanted holes to be. Backrooms story essentially is very similar to a lot of stories, similar to Obsession. We have Clark, who is a divorcee, alcoholic, who is stuck living in his failing furniture store. And then you have Dr. Mary Klein, his therapist, who is also kind of on this adventure with us. And both of their lives get changed when when Clark discovers the Backrooms in the basement of his furniture store. So really the Backrooms are acting as the element to bring the main character out of their status quo. And so I definitely expected that. But I think, actually, I'm going to start with what I think the movie did well. The movie is absolutely stunning. It's very beautiful. I think the architecture in the Backrooms, you forget that it had to be made by a person. And they oftentimes bring up in the movie that it looks like someone had to draw a picture of a dog without ever seeing a dog, just being described what a dog looks like. And that kind of made me forget that architecture in the Backrooms was made by a person. It wasn't made by like, well, nowadays in 2026 you don't know that, but seemingly it was made by a person. And so that's like hella cool to me. It was very beautiful. Just, I mean, yeah, I just had the aesthetic that so many people like about the Backrooms, that kind of comforting but uncomfortable feeling. The color grading was great. Similarly to Obsession, they did change the aspect ratio at times to bring that nostalgic feel, which also honed into the nostalgic feel that you feel with liminal space in general. They changed the aspect ratio to like 4:3 or like a square, I can't remember. And during the found footage scenes, and so that was pretty neat. I also love men in crop tops. And so a man in a crop top in a found footage is really cool. It's hard to do found footage without being cheesy, but I liked it. I think, of course, it being the Backrooms, it worked. Now, this is where I have to say, I think it's not even that the movie was bad. I think I'm disappointed that it wasn't fleshed out more, maybe? I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm disappointed that there wasn't more of the stuff I liked. I really liked the background that they gave Clark. I think he was a very complex character. I just wish they spent more time with him. Like, it's weird because they spend a lot of time with him in the beginning, but it's the middle part, it's the actual arc itself that I was missing, which sucks because I think it's a very compelling idea to have a failed architect divorcee discover the backrooms. Like, that could, and especially having the backrooms be symbolic of his mental state, I think that could have worked really well. And his arc being so underdeveloped to me is frustrating because the movie felt very, very slow at times. So I know that they had space to add more information, but especially that first time where he's in the back rooms, it felt so long. It felt like at least 15 minutes. I don't know if it actually was, but it felt like he was just in the back rooms for 15 minutes. And I understand that the appeal of the back rooms is the fact that it's empty. I just don't know how conducive that is to an actual movie. I think there's a balance that they didn't get, and especially since I don't know, I would have rather them not have the good parts than to give me some good parts and leave me wanting more. So yeah, essentially Clark, we get all his backstory, his information, we get his relationship with Mary, he goes into the back room, and then out of nowhere he's crazy now. It's not out of nowhere. Like, we see maps that he's made. We see his final conflict, his final confrontation, or one of his final confrontations with Dr. Mary, but we just don't see why he has gone crazy. And I think they had a lot to work with because, like, just beyond him being a divorcee and like having resentment towards his wife, you could have shown how that escalates into him kind of needing the back rooms, and how it enables him to stay the same way. They kind of just told us at the end with the final confrontation between Mary and Clark in the back rooms that Clark doesn't want to change, but they could have kind of showed that progression. Same with Mary. You have this fleshed out character with this really in-depth background of her mom being mentally ill and watching that, and then eventually becoming a therapist. Like, on paper it's really, really cool, but then it doesn't go anywhere, in my opinion. And I think that's the frustrating part. I definitely would have rather it have just been a horror movie than to be kind of a kind of sort of drama, a kind of sort of horror movie. So yeah, I felt like they honed into the visual visual storytelling nature of the backrooms itself, and not so and knew that they needed to have a story to make a movie, but they didn't merge the two together. So the reason I'm comparing Backrooms and Obsession is because I think in essence they're very similar in terms of X-person in their comfortable state gets introduced to something new, they're thrown a bunch of obstacles and they come out different. And, you know, typical story circle, both horror. To me, it seems like Obsession used the horror concepts to encapsulate the theme, and Backrooms, being that Backrooms was a thing before the movie, it feels like they had the concept, the horror concept of Backrooms, and they just threw a theme around it, which I don't know works as well. You don't have as much creative liberty, which again they took, right? Because they made the Backrooms seem like it was a representation of Clark's mind, which I think helps hone in on the theme that they set up, but I'm not sure. I think maybe they just got lost in the sauce of the Backrooms. Which would be a little meta. I don't know if that makes sense. Let me know if that makes sense. But although I do think personally I enjoyed Obsession more, I think both movies are great. I'm just a little nitpicky. I think in general, as a filmmaker and a YouTuber, it is like such an inspiration to be seeing YouTubers make films, and to know that we're not like just seen as dumb TikToker influencers, that we also can be included in the art, and I really like that. So I have a lot of admiration for Iron Lung and Backrooms and Obsession, and personally, it'd be a dream to make a feature film at all, and it'd be a dream to make one as widely acknowledged as those three. So yeah, I might be seeming a little harsh, but I really did like Backrooms. yeah. If you want me to go a deeper dive into anything that I've said, just let me know in the comments. If you disagree with anything I said, let me know in the comments. And yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful, lovely day. If you liked the video, like the video. If you liked multiple videos, subscribe, and I don't know what to say. Goodbye.